For today's Business Brief, we're joined by the Managing Director at Market Economics, Stephen Koukoulas. Stephen, thanks so much for your time. We're all watching the data emerging, not just in Australia, but around the world. China got some interesting data out this week, but also the labour market numbers in the United States last week, a bit softer than many had thought.
Yes, on the weekend we saw the US labour force numbers showing an increase in employment of just 75,000, less than half of what the market's expecting, and that's really baked in the cake expectations of lower interest rates from the US Federal Reserve. They've in fact got a full percentage point of rate cuts priced in over the next 12 months.
Yeah, there's a bit of data we'll be watching back home as well as in China over the next couple of weeks. Also, Stephen, we saw this really a call to arms from the RBA governor in terms of the government having to do more of the heavy lifting. Today, we see on the front page of the AFR, perhaps the government bringing forward these infrastructure projects. Will that be enough?
Look, we've had disappointing news on the Australian economy for the last couple of quarters now, the last 6 months or so, that we've had confirmation that GDP growth's below 2% in per capita terms. It's still going backwards, so the only reason we've got a plus sign on GDP is from population growth. Now, there are two things you can do about that, because that is undesirable. Nobody wants the economy to be that weak. One is the Reserve Bank can be cutting interest rates, and we've seen them start that process or restart that process. And if the futures market's right, we've got more rate cuts to come before Christmas, so they're doing their bit. Whether that's enough is the big question that the economists are confronting right now, and the discussion about what can the federal government do. They're the controllers of fiscal policy, of spending and taxation. So there are two aspects of that. One is the income tax cuts that they took to the election that will be before the Senate very soon and hopefully gets passed quite quickly, because that's a boost to consumer spending. The other one, as you mentioned, is can they bring forward some infrastructure spending, fast track it so that there's money in the economy sooner rather than later.
The G20 finance ministers meeting, where the Treasurer Josh Frydenberg was in attendance, cited the trade tensions, international trade tensions, as one of the risks facing the global economy, but did not commit to resolving those trade tensions, largely because the US didn't want that clause included in the statement. But clearly they all agree that the trade tensions, geopolitical problems are causing uncertainty.
Oh yes, the US veto, I suppose, of the communique from the G20 finance ministers meeting was a concern, and we do know that the trade wars as they currently exist, let alone if they escalate further, are already having a negative impact on global trade. We've seen some of the Chinese data which came out yesterday confirming what is actually a huge trade surplus. Now, that sounds perverse in a sense, but the trade surplus is there because what we're seeing is ahead of the tariffs perhaps increasing more, US companies are ramping up their imports from China before the tariffs kick in. So you've got this perverse situation. The trade wars, while they're seeing global trade decline, the trade balance between China and the US is getting even bigger.
So is there a good case for Labor supporting this full package of tax cuts, given we've just had an election, it was central to it?
Oh, look, I think they should just get on with it and pass the tax cuts. Certainly the first couple of tranches, there's no doubt that they're part of the government's... Yeah, look, I think so too. I think Labor's got a political problem. This is not so much an economic issue, it's more a political problem if they don't pass the full tranche, because they'll be accused of being against income tax cuts. For the next 3 years, you'd see the Morrison government bang them over the head with, oh, you failed to pass the full set of our tax cuts. So they'll have that as a real lead weight in their saddle as they're trying to re-engage with the sort of the middle part of the Australian populace, and that's a problem. So pass them through, get on with it, and then come up with your own policies and bring them to the 2022 election.
Sage advice, Stephen Koukoulas. Thanks. Talk to you soon.
Thank you.